Okay, in this video we're going to build on what we built in the previous video with our circle view, but actually add a table of values that are associated with each of our schools and our subgroups. Now in the last session we took a look at a way to duplicate a page as a way to easily take in all of the work that we've done so far, but maybe make a few changes to it. So we're actually going to do the same thing down here, and I'm going to right click, but instead of just duplicating the page, I'm going to duplicate it as a crosstab. And a crosstab is going to be a table of values that represents the same information that was shown in our previous chart. If you notice here, we have our name, so I'm going to change this to be something a little bit more meaningful. I'm going to change this to circle chart. And I'm going to change the second one to be our crosstab. Now when I first look at this here, one of the things that I notice is I have a lot of wasted space here to the right. One thing that I can do to change that is to go up here where it says standard, click on that drop down, and instead of standard to fit width. That will expand the width to fill the entire screen. Now, as I'm looking through here, it made sense before to break up things and have a different symbol for my different school performance grades, but really this doesn't give me a whole lot of additional meaning. All of these categories are mutually exclusive for the numbers that are associated with each of these school performance grades. And so I'm actually going to remove this from my chart by clicking and dragging that off. And instead of having each individual row be a subgroup, I want to have my columns go across from my subgroups. And so I can actually just move subgroup from the rows up to the columns. And now I get a separate score for each subgroup. Now, if you recall from the last video, we also had our subgroup filter over here. We had removed some of them. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and put them all back into the picture because I want to have a table with all of the values. Now, as I scroll through here, one thing that I notice is that none of these schools in Durham have a large enough population of American Indian students to have a value for their SPG score. So in this case, we're going to take this. We could filter out that subgroup to remove that blank space, or we can use something we've used in a previous session, and that is to only have things appear for valid scores. And in this case, we can set a filter to be any school performance grade score that is 1 or higher. So basically anything that's not blank. So I'm going to go back down here to my measures. Again, this is my numerical measure of school performance grade score. Take that up here to a filter. Filter on all values, and I can use the at least option and make sure that I only include values that have a school performance grade score of at least 1. And this is a filter that I don't want my user to see, so I'm just going to leave it here. I'm not necessarily going to show it. And when I click OK here, notice that that blank column is now gone. Now let's dig a little bit more into the formatting features of Tableau to make this a little bit easier to read. Just like I did on the previous view on the circle chart, I'm going to click and drag this over to make sure that my school names are showing. But I can actually format the text here to be a little bit more legible. This is a little bit small and I want it to be larger for my readers to be able to see. So I just go here to anywhere in the field and I right click. And I always have this option to format. And I want to draw your attention over here to the left-hand side to this format font card that shows up on the left-hand side. So if you notice here, we have options where we can do things for the entire sheet, or we can just do things to rows or just do things to columns. There's also options not only for the font, but also for alignment, for color, for borders, and for lines. And depending on what you want to use your visualization for, some of these other options may be appropriate. I'm going to change my default view here to make the text a little bit bigger. Notice it's defaulting here to 9-point font. I'm going to change that to 11-point. And I'm also going to change my font to be bold. Now, in addition to that here, I'm going to change my alignment to make sure that each of my columns now is centered. So I just go up here to my format alignment, and again, change my default for everything here to be centered. And notice here, everything now in my chart is centered. I double check here to make sure that my title is still relevant. This still looks good. It has my LEA name, school performance grade scores by subgroup, and the school year has not changed. So I can close out my format alignment card here. And again, I go back to where I have all of my variables, my dimensions or my categories, and my measures or my numerical values. But one last thing that I want to take a look at here are these subgroup abbreviations. There's a way within Tableau that we can change these labels by utilizing something called aliases. And whenever we change it for one of our sheets, if we do it in the underlying data set, it will apply to all of our sheets. So let's take a look at a few labels that might be a bit confusing. One is this EDS, which stands for Economically Disadvantaged Students, and ELS, which is English Learners. So I'm going to change these two values to have something that is a little bit more universally recognizable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my dimensions card and go to subgroup, and I can either right click or click on this little arrow here. And I'm going to go to the aliases dialog box. So notice here I have all of my labels that are here in the members column. And then currently the alias or the value that shows to the user is exactly the same. But I can change any one of these by just clicking on it. So if I click here on EDS, notice it turns blue and I can edit it. So I'm going to change this to Economically Disadvantaged, Econ Dis. And then I'm going to change my ELS as well to English Learners. And when I click OK, notice here every place where it shows up, so Economically Disadvantaged and English Learners shows up here. It's also going to change in my filter. And since I changed it in the underlying data, in my previous view, in my other worksheet, it's also going to change as well. So notice it changed in my filter and in the legend as well. So this is a clever way for us to be able to reassign labels without having to edit the underlying data that is being fed into Tableau. Now, one thing here that I notice is that my English Learners is cut off. One nice thing about my original labels was that they were compact. In this case, when I had to lengthen them a bit for readability, it makes it a little bit tougher. So I'm going to use this double-headed arrow and drag this down. And again, if I bring this down far enough, it's going to allow that full label to be viewable. So that's a crosstab. And in the next video, we're going to take this crosstab and turn it into another view based on its underlying structure.